our goal today, our unrehearsed goal today, is to really bring that home. Climate change to many people becomes really political very quickly. I think I've forgotten who used the words, but creating a safe place like today to talk about issues that we know mean something to us today and tomorrow and the next day and our kids and our grandkids and that next generation. And that's what we hope to achieve here, is really bringing it home. And with that, our panelists today, and the bios are obviously written out in terms of in fact, I think I won't do that. I think I'll just go down the list real quick here. The bios speak for themselves, but we have a more local perspective, we have a global perspective, and we have a perspective from Louisville, Kentucky, which has a wonderful story that we can learn from. So, Ben, why don't you really quickly just go down and introduce yourselves in about 30 seconds, 45 seconds.
Okay. Hi, Ben Ryan, originally from southwest Tennessee. So Australia, so it is southwest of Tennessee.
Way southwest.
I'm in the Frist College of Medicine at Belmont University in 2 roles at the university. One of those is infusing environmental health science into the medical curriculum, and the other one is expanding global initiatives to the university. Belmont's really focused on digging deep in other parts of the world, and I'm leading out some of those activities.
So the global perspective, what starts local with the individual is really global, and global comes back to local, and this integration is really what Nashville Health is all about. All right, Kendra.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kendra Abkowitz. I'm Senior Director of Sustainability and Resilience with the Office of Mayor Freddie O'Connell. I've lived in Nashville just about all my life, so 37 years. And then my professional career, I've spent a lot of time working on sustainability at Vanderbilt University and multiple different environments there. I worked on environmental policy, strategic planning, and environmental justice issues at the state for about 10 years. And then more recently, I've been in this role at the local level, and so get the great privilege of working across many metro departments on the topics of environmental stewardship, sustainability, and resilience. So grateful to be with you all today.
And from our neighbor, Louisville, Kentucky, a great friend with a great story and some storytelling that you'll hear about shortly. Ted?
Well, good morning. As the Senator mentioned, I'm from a soon-to-be suburb of Nashville, Louisville, Kentucky. Congratulations on all your tremendous growth for 30 or 40 years. And a big thanks to the Senator for the invitation. It's a real delight to be down here. It's just a wonderful city, wonderful people. I've learned a ton already. So my day job is I'm a professor of environmental medicine at the University of Louisville School of Medicine. It's a pretty strange place, as you'll hear the story, for the work that we do. But all of my colleagues are cardiovascular researchers. Some of them are basic scientists, some of them are clinicians, some of them are epidemiologists. And we try to bring that all together in an organization we call the Envirome Institute. We made up that word. If you know the word genome, Envirome is the complement. We can talk a little bit more of that in a minute. But thank you all for having me.
Thank all three of you for being with us. Kendra, let's see. Start local. We have the hottest days in history, in recorded history, over the past year that superseded the year before that. We in Tennessee have been subjected to a hurricane that has been devastating to much of East Tennessee coming in. So we have unstable weather patterns. Take us to Nashville and give us a little bit of a feel of what this changing climate is doing, impact it's having on Nashville itself.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll share some data and then some larger framing context. Climate change is expected to worsen extreme heat more than any other hazard. I'll also share with you that extreme heat is the leading cause of death among all hazardous weather events and produces more premature deaths than all other hazardous weather events combined. And so I share that with you to note that extreme heat is a really significant health concern, and it's one that Nashville really needs to be thinking about. The First Street Foundation recently produced a report that predicted that in 2023 we would have 26 extreme heat days, and by 2053 we would have 45. So that's really a doubling of the number of extreme heat days just in a short period of time. So it's barreling down at us really, really quickly. When we look at how that impacts us locally, I think we see it a couple of ways. One is public health. So we know that conditions such as asthma, diabetes, obesity, coronary heart disease, COPD, that really affects the body's ability to cope with extreme heat. So individuals with those existing conditions are going to really struggle when we see extreme heat happen here. We also know that we're going to have some economic challenges that come with that, right? So it's estimated that increasing temperatures will create $74.9 million in additional energy costs for Tennesseans each year during the summer months by the year 2053 relative to 2023. So we were just talking about low-income populations. And in this case, we see extreme heat really as a risk multiplier, and it's going to really exacerbate some of those income disparities and challenges that we have at a local economic level. And then lastly, I'll say extreme heat is going to have a significant impact on our infrastructure. So when we look at our roadways and our built infrastructure and its ability to weather extreme heat, but also extreme cold, I know we've all seen potholes. We talk a lot about potholes in the mayor's office. It's something we talk about nearly daily. We're going to see more of that, and that has real impacts in terms of how we manage our city's budget. We're going to have to think differently about materials and what types of conditions we're building our infrastructure for. So those are kind of three specific buckets I'd share. We also know that there's a significant differential between the hottest and the coolest areas of the city. So in 2022, we actually partnered with citizen scientists across the city to conduct a heat mapping campaign. We drove 10 different routes across 100 square miles of the city. And in capturing tens of thousands of temperature and humidity measurements, we learned that there's as much as 12 degrees difference between the hottest areas of our city and the coolest areas of our city. And so some of the things that would contribute to that differential are built infrastructure. So when we have a lot of dense, impervious surface, that helps to actually absorb and retain heat. And so that's where strategies like planting more trees, thinking about the types of materials that we're using can really come into play. So we already have some good data, and now the time it has come to think about how we're using that data.
Kendra, thank you. On the first of all, the mapping and the geo-mapping and the expertise that comes from a number of people here, from Meharry and from other places, has been really eye-opening. And I say that because if you look at data like green spaces, and I have the opportunity to work with the Nature Conservancy and spend a lot of time with it. Laurel Creech is here and others representing the state. When you look at the data, Nashville is okay green, but if you go a little bit deeper, and this is why the science of the mapping is so important, you see that the green is not necessarily in the places that it is most needed from an adaptation mitigation standpoint. Anything about that we should comment on? And I say that because I have to look beneath the data, and that's the importance of the storytelling coming in. But how green is Nashville?
Nashville is green, but not in an equitable sense, right? So we have significant patches where we see a lot of green space. We've done a good job of, I think, preserving large tracts of land. But then also where we've seen more dense development, we have struggled to maintain or really increase our tree canopy. And so I think with that comes a lot of inequity, right? So we know that there have been various historic decisions that have been made, whether that's redlining, interstate construction, land use decisions, siting of industrial facilities, that are really creating a lot of inequity in terms of access to green space. And so I think thinking about the equity piece is really important when we think about how we develop and grow as a city. So when we see that growth happen, how are we intentionally creating green spaces and access to those green spaces as part of that growth and development?
Do green spaces matter? Do green spaces matter? We came out of COVID and people loved going to parks because they felt better. we all know if we go outside, you've been inside all day or on a Zoom all day, you go outside, or if there's a plant sitting here, it makes a difference. But does it really? Ted, there has been really no clinical trials in the history of this country to really demonstrate that a tree is anything, really. No clinical trials, except one. Ted?
All right.
No pressure.
No pressure there, exactly. That's a build. Absolutely true, but I just correct that. There's been no clinical trial done in the world to prove this. And so this is tricky because for all the good things you just said about how sort of intuitively we understand that nature must be good for us, we haven't actually spent any energy to develop the evidence. And so 7 years ago in Louisville, myself, my colleagues, brave philanthropist, took the challenge on. So we said, there's a lot of associative evidence, 200 peer-reviewed publications that say people that live near greenness, we'll call it greenness, it can be trees, but it can be other things. People who live near greenness, I like to call it nature, people who live near nature have significantly better health outcomes. All causes of mortality, right? If you want to make a medication that treats all causes of mortality, one does not exist. Okay, so people living in green spaces, lower cancer incidence, lower cardiovascular incidence, lower Alzheimer's. It's a very long list. Okay, so again, intuitively, we see these associations. We say this is what's happening. Now, if you want to be a real scientist about it, you say, well, there's a lot going on. We heard that rich people live near green places, and rich people have good health outcomes anyway, and poor people maybe don't have as much green stuff. And so a lot of times, and I know you come from the world of public policy, eye rolling begins, right? It's just like, well, it's probably not the tree, right? So the only way to really break this is to do a controlled trial. And so 7 years ago, with unbelievable partnership from the Nature Conservancy, and this is how the senator ended up in our backyard a few months ago, because while we were a bunch of clinical researchers and we went to NIH and we said, we'd like to do a clinical trial to demonstrate how trees reduce cardiovascular disease risk, they said, that's great. Actually, they triaged the grant twice. The third time, they said, that's great, because the first two times they said, what does NIH have to do with trees? Anyway, so third time they got it. And then said, here's $5 million. And we said, well, the trees and bushes and other things are going to cost $9 million. So can you help us out? And they said, this is a drug trial. And NIH has a policy. It doesn't pay for the drugs in the drug trial, which is a true statement, by the way. Now, that's unfortunate because most times the drugs are the cheapest part of the trial. So we found the Nature Conservancy at that exact moment in time. And then bravely, the Nature Conservancy at that time was looking at urban conservation. It was a shift in the mentality of, let's also talk about nature in cities, not just nature in faraway places that you may never see. And that was just serendipitous. And so they bravely put their finger on the table and said, we'll cover the drugs. And they did. And they raised $9 million, and it was unbelievable. And that money, jointly with the NIH clinical trial money, ultimately has made a $22 million, the largest of its kind, interventional clinical trial to study the effects of greenness. And so in just the quick version, to do that work, you got to go find a place that needs some greening. And so you back to that GIS stuff, looking at the maps, looking at the data, find some neighborhoods. You need places with relatively high owner occupancy because it's a long-term trial. So if people move away, the science falls apart. So you're looking for that. You're looking for a mix of socioeconomics. We found a place in South Louisville. It's 4 neighborhoods, home to 22,000 people. We recruited 800 of those residents, and we worked them up. And so we full cardiovascular workup, full immune workup, psychosocial evaluation, all of that good stuff. We assessed the air quality in the area. We can talk a little bit in a moment about air pollution. So we told NIH we think that the trees and bushes are helpful as filters. Of all the things you could tell NIH, that was a winner because there's a lot of evidence that pollution causes heart disease. And so we said, let's tell you, but we'll find a place with a lot of pollution, and whatever. So we found the perfect place, 4 neighborhoods. We work with the neighborhoods. You can't do a clinical trial that's that public, right? You're planting in not only public rights of ways, but in people's yards. So that is a social contract with a community. So they clearly had to be on board. They had to sort of want to do this, or at least be inclined to do this. So we got them all worked up. We got our baseline data. We had a pandemic. So then we had to come back and get them all worked up again. So re-baseline, because it turns out COVID's pretty bad for your cardiovascular system. We had 2 areas, a treatment area and a control area. You can think of it as a donut. So in the middle of the donut is the treatment, where we were going to plant a whole bunch of stuff, and then these matched controls just outside, equal number of people inside and outside. And so that would help us with any other changes that might go on, because those changes would occur for both groups, right? And so we plant 8,000 mature trees. Okay, those trees are coming from all over the United States. Many of them came from Tennessee. These trees are 30 feet tall. That is because we couldn't wait 20 years for small trees to grow up to big trees and keep the study together, right? So a lot of arborists didn't like us, because they'd rather grow a small tree into a big tree, whatever. So we plant all these trees. We did very quickly. So in 2 summers, 2 planting seasons, we got it all done. And then we went back and started post-testing. Okay, and this summer was our first readout, and the senator came up for that readout. Our first results were a 20% reduction in a marker of inflammation just for those in the treatment area. And that marker of inflammation is an important marker. We didn't actually expect to see anything so quickly, an acute response to nature, but we have it, and we'll see where it goes from there.
So this is really, really interesting, and this is probably something none of you have heard about. In all of the clinical trials at the National Institutes of Health, you have all these drugs, hundreds and thousands of drugs, and then you have University of Louisville, Nature Conservancy, Environment Institute. What's the drug? Trees. It's a clinical trial. It was C-reactive protein, for those of you who are in medicine. It's something you measure in your bloodstream, inflammation that correlates strongly with heart disease, with lung disease, with cancer, with any inflammatory disease. And this is a longitudinal study, so this is the first readout. But the fact that we have a 20%, 15%, depending on sort of the numbers themselves, reduction with an intervention in a clinically controlled trial is the first of its kind coming through. The Nature Conservancy stepped in early, but they're probably 15 to 20 partners. Much of our thematic here, it's all collaboration. That's what Nashville Health is. Nashville Health doesn't take like one item and just push that. It's bringing together groups of people, aligning their interests, putting the objectives out there that are measurable, because you want to go to scale. You want to take what we do here to Nashville, to Cincinnati, or maybe something back to Louisville or Los Angeles coming in. Again, global or local to regional to global. Oh, global. Ben, how about that? Why don't you tell us a little bit from the global perspective coming in, and then bring it back to home for us?
Yes, great example. That tree planting is a wonderful example, which is really, I think, going to set the scene for other parts of the world. And as Senator Frist, you were saying, local to global, we're really focused in on at Belmont, going local to global to local. So, for example, next week I'll be in Incheon, South Korea, at a UN forum around disaster resilience. And Incheon, a very well laid out city just outside Seoul. And they've got a Central Park. They've even got some of the streets named after New York Central Park. But one of the challenges they've had is urban heat island. So they've put in all the buildings and high-rises, and their windows open only this far. So they only open a little bit in the high-rises. So when there is hot weather, they've designed it for cold, but now we're seeing the change to urban heat islands. People need to use their electricity for cooling, which then has other effects for the environment, but they can only open their window this far. Where if there'd been different strategies, which they're trying in Abu Dhabi, for example, where you have AI used to close your curtains and do other things to keep the apartments cooler, that could mitigate the risk. So that's one example. The reason urbanisation and cities really need to be a focus too, is that currently 56% of people around the world live in cities. By 2050, this is expected to go up to close to 70%. So we're moving from 4.4 billion people to 6.8 billion people moving into cities. We're seeing weather patterns change around cities as well, air pollution. Urban canyons is something that is really emerging, particularly out of Europe, looking at urban canyons. They have their own little microclimate within a city as well, so that's where you've got all these high-rise buildings. They stop the traditional wind path. There's heat that comes in from the sun, so you've got all these factors starting to roll in together. You've got cardiovascular risks that can kick in from the air pollution. Some of the strategies that people are looking at, or different parts of the world, are Sydney, for example, is looking at tree canopies. A lot of areas are having an aspirational goal of around 40% of the city with tree canopies. You've got LA's looking at changing the colour of some concrete to stop, the heat from the sun, mitigating the absorption there. You got Rotterdam in Netherlands. They're trying greenery of roofs, so that's where you put a garden on the roof. And we're seeing EPA publish this about a drop of 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I grew up in Australia, so I'm used to Celsius, so some of my conversions may not work. But EPA said 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's by putting a garden on the rooftop. That can reduce the temperature in the city itself by 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can see there's these emerging solutions globally. It's becoming a real focus. I'm very solutions orientated. I think there's positivity with urbanisation. We just need to anticipate what's happening, and we have the technology to do that. There's other things you can do in the streets. You'd see this in Taipei, Taiwan. For example, you'll put trees down the middle of the street rather than on the side, because what you want to do is cover the asphalt to reduce the temperature. So that can also reduce the temperature by, here we go, 4 degrees Celsius. And I had to do some studies, and I found that's roughly, for example, 87 Fahrenheit to 81. So there are solutions there that we can look to really apply. And I think, Ted, your example of that cardiovascular study, we're really seeing the scientific and human health benefits. And if we think of, as Kendra was talking, some of the most vulnerable areas of Nashville, there's these lessons that we can take from local communities around the world, take them global and bring them local to Nashville, but also go the other way. So I'm positive about what we can do because there are solutions. And globally, this is definitely an area, urbanisation is a real focus. US, for example, we have about 80% of people live in cities. So you can see people are looking to the US as well as other countries look to urbanise. But globally, this is definitely a challenge we need to target and focus in on.
So you see how this arc of local, regional, global, coming back local, it's practical. It makes sense. It's sharing of information. It's no longer, we can no longer stay in our boxes of being a small city, a small community. And that's very much a part of opening the lens of having discussions like we're having today. I want to get to why does it really matter here shortly in terms of mental health, in terms of vector-borne diseases, in terms of things that really affect us every day. But Kendra, based on sort of what we've just heard, what about Nashville? Some of the things that are either going on. I too am really optimistic about this topic. It's going to require us focusing, getting together, channeling resources appropriately, getting the language right to kind of depoliticize it coming in. But what's going on in Nashville?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in Nashville. It's super interesting to hear about what other cities are doing because I think there are a couple of things we're doing or trialing, but not necessarily deploying citywide. When I look at the city's role in this space, I put it into two buckets. So one is moving forward with strategies that seek to lower air temperatures or to reduce vulnerability and exposure to extreme heat. And then the second one would be preparing our residents and supporting response in those extreme heat and disaster events. And so this is a topic that you might not think of it this way, but it's incredibly interdisciplinary. There are multiple metro departments that touch this. And so we do have a robust tree canopy restoration program. that's operated by our Metro Water Services Department in partnership with several nonprofits. We have a goal to plant 50,000 trees by 2050, or I'm sorry, 500,000 trees by 2050. We are close to planting 50,000 trees. We also are pursuing a lot of low-impact development strategies, so things like green roofs. Our Nashville Department of Transportation and Multimodal Infrastructure is looking at more aggressively deploying green and complete streets, so thinking about really strategic ways to use our road infrastructure for decreasing urban heat island effect. Also looking at things like cool sealant. So how can we put sealant on our roadways that not only helps with maintenance, but also reduces and reflects some of that extreme heat. We have a variety of different policies that we're pursuing in partnership with some of our nonprofit partners in our planning department to look at how we change land use. Our Office of Emergency Management is significantly involved in organizing response in extreme heat events. We Go Public Transit offers free transportation services to the unhoused community during extreme heat events. And the list really goes on and on and on. And so I think we're doing a lot. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that we have a very robust parks and greenway system. And those properties in and of themselves are massive opportunities to reduce those temperatures. But what I think we're not doing yet is thinking across each of those individual silos. I know every organization has silos, government particularly has silos, and so something we're thinking about is there a need to create an urban heat strategy that sort of says, okay, here's what each individual department is doing, and here's where the gaps are. Here's also where we can better leverage the business community and private sector, nonprofit partners, things like that. So there's a lot of exciting activities going on. I think piecing that all together and figuring out where we can be doing more as part of where we need to go.
Do we have an urban heat strategy now?
Not a coordinated one.
Yeah, and I think this idea of coordination, just me even asking that question because it's going to stimulate somebody in here saying, okay, we just need to do it. And it's not just government. These aren't, having been in government a lot, in the private sector a lot, and building businesses a lot, and obviously doing the nonprofit philanthropic world, it is a collaboration among all of those. And it means a certain kind of recognition that we're not doing as well as we'd like to do, so how can we get together to do it? This alignment for it. And I think we have a mayor right now who is unbelievable, and he, in terms of focus, in terms of caring about the community, getting down and listening to everybody. And I think we have a great opportunity now to kind of elevate this in terms of a strategy that we can all feed into as individuals, our organizations, our public policy, our think tanks coming in. Ted, let's come back to some of the impact. Pollution, we know, in one of the books that's being handed out today is all about how environment and climate and weather and unstable weather patterns and heat affects the body. You started in this field looking at heart, cardiac. Pollution we know about, but what is pollution, so I'll understand it, what does pollution have to do with climate change? Do hotter days change pollution that in some way increases its impact? Talk to us a little bit about it. Start with the heart and then move out from there.
It's a little unfair, you asking me to start with the heart, but I'll take a shot at it. So air pollution, is sort of a cornerstone of the way we were thinking about the challenge. But what's in the air is a complicated situation. I think of it as a soup, right? So that soup, it's a chemical soup, it's a biological soup, a lot going on. And when we breathe, let's call it that soup, the first line is the lungs, so I'm going to get to the heart. The lungs are important because they keep the heart warm. So
I'm a thoracic surgeon, so I start with the lungs.
We're
as well.
good. We're good.
The
there,
lungs
right?
and the
so
heart. All right,
good.
Keep going.
It can get very tribal. So all right. So immediately that those gases will cause the airways to constrict. They'll be irritated by air pollution. They'll be irritated by hot air pollution. They'll be irritated by higher levels of pollen and air pollution and heat. Okay, so the first line is already under attack, right? So the entire inflammation response begins at the lungs. It's a systemic response, so the entire body is now to alarm fire. Okay, the smallest particles that you breathe are going to work their way into the vasculature. And so they're going to be in your circulatory system. They're going to be irritating the inner lining of your blood vessels. And as you irritate the inner lining of the blood vessels, they too start to react just like your airways do. And they have very difficult times with everyday repair that's going on. And so plaque formation, disruption of plaques that might be in there, much more likely when that stuff is in your vasculature. So the system...
Which is heart attack, stroke. You can see we're very quickly, 50% of the people in the room are going to die of heart attack or stroke, of half. I don't want to talk about death, but we're talking to you. And me. Keep going.
All of us, right?
Keep going.
The weak link of our species, for sure. And then, of course, it's going to go up into the brain, right? So all of this small particulate matter will cross the blood-brain barrier. It's a big problem. So now we have inflammation of the brain. Now, if you're not a psychiatrist, inflammation of the brain is also called depression. And so if you take an antidepressant, you're taking an anti-inflammatory product. And so it's all connected. I mean, this is one thing. We have a friend in common who says, it's just common sense, but it's all connected. It is all connected. And so if we can work on this heat, do it in a way that's thoughtful about air pollution and things that cause air pollution, thinking about nature and when it's good and when it's bad, we can solve a lot of problems at the same time. That's sort of what I think we're learning.
And it is this holistic approach. Again, Nashville Health, it's not like around one person. It's not like around just a child or one disease or one entity, all of which is hugely important. It really is taking this more holistic view that health is not health care. We got the best health care here. Not everybody can access it, but we got the best health care, or equally good to any place in the world here. Our health and well-being, not so good coming in. So this holistic view, and again, just kind of marching through the body, exactly as Ted just did, that's what climate, it's what a changing climate, it's what changing climate's impact on pollution is having in all of our bodies every single day. Heat matters. Weather matters. Ted, Ben, why don't I turn to you? Tracy, my wife, who couldn't be with us today, doesn't mind me telling this story, but about 8 years ago, developed a disease that was really pretty debilitating for her in terms of asthma, rashes, fatigue, the sort of thing. And we didn't know exactly what it was. The physicians here didn't know what it was. And maybe it was 10 years ago now. It ended up being alpha-gal. Now, alpha-gal is something that most of you didn't know much about. It started here in Tennessee and in Virginia. Now it's all over the East Coast coming in, but it's an allergy to beef coming in. We ultimately figured out, but it was because of a tick. And it's the Lone Star tick, and the Lone Star tick didn't used to be around here. All of a sudden, the Lone Star tick is around here. And I use that, you don't have to comment on Lone Star ticks, but I use that as a personal example of it matters. Climate matters, habitat matters. Take us to the world, Ben, of sort of vector-borne diseases, and then you can move out from there into other health impacts and go wherever you like, mental health or chronic disease or acute disease.
So what we are seeing is cities are hotter. The evidence shows you cities are hotter, their environment's hotter, and what that means, we can anticipate what's going to happen. As we see hotter climates, you can see new ticks, such as the Lone Star tick will move north. Again, living in Australia, I think opposite way, so lucky I said north. But you'll see moving up into the cooler climates. You'll see that with mosquitoes as well. There's not much of this yet in the US as you move north, but you've got the Aedes aegypti mosquito. That's a mosquito that spreads dengue, yellow fever, chikungunya, Zika. So you get rid of that mosquito, you get rid of 4 diseases at once, but if that mosquito comes in, you can have 4 new diseases. And we're seeing that really emerge in many parts of the world where we have rapid, unsustainable urbanisation. So as Nashville grows, we need to think about how can we do this in a sustainable way that mosquito doesn't breed or come in. And that lives around households and those types of areas. It's a daytime mosquito. We do have the Albopictus mosquito, so I'm doing a bit of an entomology class here as well. That's the one that will live in your bushlands and maybe your trees and things like that. But we can anticipate this and mitigate and manage the risks. That also spreads dengue, but isn't as good as the Egypti. It might only spread 30% of the time, but the Egypti might be close to 90, just for example. But you could also, we have the Anopheles mosquito in this area, which spreads malaria. So you can start to see as we get a heating climate, we need to anticipate these risks. We do have solutions. Thinking globally, Egypt is now declared malaria-free. So you can see there are solutions to do this. We just need to anticipate the risk coming down and mitigate that. And then as we see other heat growing, we can think about bacteria growing in food. I think Broadway is pretty popular for tourists, isn't it? If people go there and then they go home and they get sick with vomiting or diarrhea, some sort of foodborne illness, that's not a good thing for tourism. So as the temperature's getting warmer, we need to think about food safety standards as well. We also need to think about wastewater systems. As we get more people coming in, the waste system will become overwhelmed, and as that happens, disease risk increases. Water quality as well, we can have algae blooms as we get more heat. So what we need to do is not panic. We just need to anticipate these things and invest in solutions, because we know how to solve these public health challenges. It's just having the resources and the desire, and we need the collaboration to be able to address the challenges as they come to Nashville.
Kendra, coming back to Nashville, let's turn a little bit for all three of us to the economic impact. When we're talking about jobs and job creation and limited resources and where the resources come from, obviously the economic impact is something that is central or should be central to every discussion. Talk to us a little bit about sort of economic impact in Nashville regionally in terms of climate change.
Yeah, so we've got some really great data and examples from areas outside of sort of extreme heat focus. We have really great data from energy efficiency and renewable energy, and I'll share a couple of examples, and then I'll also quickly touch on the transit referendum, since that's on everyone's mind. So we, about 2 years ago, sort of underwent an analysis to say, okay, we're a large property owner. What would it look like if we tried to maximize how we're using our properties to deploy renewable energy? We have a renewable portfolio standard here. And so we engaged in a solar cost benefit analysis, and what we learned over a 2-year period is that if we utilized and installed solar across 235 properties, we could potentially deploy up to 100 megawatts of solar energy here locally, and that could potentially save us up to $79 million over a 30-year period. And so in the local government world, that's really important, because those are resources that can be freed up and deployed to other critical services. Now, we're very slowly working our way through that implementation, but that's one example of where cost savings are a real thing. We also are required to track performance of our LEED certified buildings. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with the LEED certification system, it is a building high performance sustainability certification. It includes things like energy efficiency, renewable energy, green infrastructure, reducing urban heat island effects. It includes indoor air quality health, a whole host of different things. And so we are actually required within Metro to build to a minimum of essentially LEED gold, sometimes LEED silver, depending on where the building's located. That makes sense. We're long-term owners of those buildings, and so we want them to be around and performing at a high level for a long time. But we are required to track the performance of those, and so for 23 of those high-performance buildings reviewed, we saved a total of over 26 million kBTU of energy and avoided energy costs of more than $525,000 compared to the non-LEED buildings, and that's just at an annual level. And so imagine if you were to compound that. We have similar data for water savings of about $1.25 million in water costs annually. So real great data about improvements there. We haven't quite gone to that extent when looking at things like tree canopy. We do roughly try to quantify the benefits of tree canopy restoration on the tree level, but not in as robust of a way as I think we should. I mentioned I'd quickly touch on transportation, significant economic benefits. I know that Aaron addressed this earlier, so we have data that indicates that owning, maintaining, operating, parking a car in Nashville can be up to $1,000 a month. And so by investing in more options to move around the city and giving choices to people, that can provide significant cost savings if you're not, again, forced to drive a vehicle around the city. And that's relative to a pretty reasonable investment that we'll be asking from our voters of about $6 a month for the average household. Significant health benefits from that as well. So 51% of Nashville's greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. We also just talked about all the nasty things that air pollution can do to your lungs. I feel like maybe I got like 1 semester of medical school in just by today. But super significant investment, also encouraging more active transportation, right? By improving our sidewalks, building more bikeways. And so I think very significantly connected to health, but also will have considerable economic benefits. So those are a couple of examples of where we're seeing that. We need to do a better job of
I think the
quantifying
transportation is really interesting, and one of the things that Nashville Health does, it basically says we need to look at public policy through the lens or a filter of health and well-being. By doing that, we get to the equity issues really quickly, because not everybody needs everything. But there are people who, if we focus on it, will have a disproportionate impact on raising up everybody, not just the people with whom that help is extended. And that's very much around the sort of economic impetus of a Nashville Health and why it's unique and why we appreciate support of people coming in, because we uniquely are actually looking at that economic impact. Ted, let's extend it just a little bit, because early on, and I met it's called the Green Heart program in Louisville. In many ways, it started, as you described, with the impact on heart disease. We knew it was big. We knew it was holistic. It wasn't just green trees. Heart disease cost, whatever it was, $650 million. You give the statistics. But work with that a little bit and walk us into the economic impact you see, either potentially that program having or things that you're doing at the Environmental Institute.
Sure. It's a great angle. I mean, so I think a lot of times we like to partition these things, but we should all understand that the cost of chronic disease in this country and around the world, especially in the developed world, is the single largest drag on the GDP, for sure. And in much smaller countries in the United States, it will be the end of their economies. I promise you that. I mean, they're just going to have to adopt heartless policies of letting people go untreated. It's just an economic thing at that point in time. So there's a hard economic argument here about how important it is to keep people healthy or avoid developing disease, right? As you said, great healthcare city. Healthcare doesn't get you health. So it turns out everything else gets you health. And then we have healthcare for when everything else isn't working, right? And so it is an economic matter, for sure. And if you want to grow sustainably as a community, having healthy people is a good strategy, okay? And so then it really raises the question, what does all the stuff that we do have anything to do with that? And I think it is because, again, intuitively we know there are better ways to live, okay? We call them sustainable ways, we can call them natural, whatever you want to call them. We don't really have to think too hard about it. Unfortunately, we do have to sort of show you how it works because, you know, out of convenience in a consumer economy, we can drift into all sorts of places. I will just say, if we adopt some of these strategies to, let's say, bring nature back into cities, we'll get multiple dividends. Right? So it's a multiplier. So not only if I'm going to reduce inflammation, that also means I'm going to reduce depression. That also means I'm going to reduce cardiometabolic disease. That also means I'm going to spend more time potentially with my neighbors because I'm in a more accessible place, right? All of a sudden, the dividends start multiplying in a way that there's no simple ROI for a tree. But there is an ROI for a healthy place. And I think we also know economically, most employers in the United States are fully at risk. This is a very, very expensive trend for our economy. How do we help employers understand that valuing places is an important strategy for their workforce, for their economy. So I think our role, at least where I'm sitting, is let's bring some hard evidence. Let's show that you're buying health when you're buying nature, to just help those that are a little bit on the fence. So I don't know. I'm really optimistic. I share your optimism.
No,
I know we can do this.
I think,
let's just do it.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic about it because it is clear we have a challenge here through adaptation mitigation, which are the sort of fancy words that we use of what we can do now. And I want to end with the question here about what individuals, just kind of everybody out there, well, this is pretty good stuff. It's big, it's global, it's planetary, it's environment, but I'm just like an individual and I can't do much about that. Well, let's kind of go down the line and suggest some things that people can do. Clearly, Nashville Health is going to look at it because that's our job, is to look at the things collectively and get the alignment right. Using, and what TED represents, if you can't measure something, it's really hard to improve it. So at Nashville Health, we look at measures and metrics and geomapping and intervention, but then measure the impacts. And that's the way you go to scale. That's the way you go regional and you go global coming in. I share that just because I want to keep injecting why Nashville Health is so unique and why I'm so committed to it coming through. Why don't we just go ahead and talk a little bit? I'll start. What can an individual or an organization do? And we'll finish here in 5 minutes. We'll only take a minute. Ooh, I got to go fast. I was in a board meeting, so I do a lot of public company boards, or have, and boards, as most of you know. And this is a conservative company. It was not based here in Nashville. Conservative in terms of their leadership. And I keep talking climate change. I don't use the word very much until later, so I get into the conversation. But I talk about the changing climate, the hot days and the hurricanes, and then people listen a little bit. And I said, why don't we just talk about it at the board level, the impact on our company? They said, that's just Frist talking about, this more progressive thinking that's out there. And the second meeting I came back and said, let's do it. And they said, no, that's Frist again. And the third time they said, well, let's just kind of, give Frist a bone, and we'll look at what it's doing to our company. The next meeting, we came back, and 5 people came back and reported individually of the impact on this. It happened to be a healthcare company. And the leadership of the company, which is really skeptical of climate change, is each of those 5 people came up and talked about air conditioners burning out at a greater frequency and the cost, talked about the liability, the increasing lawsuits, the effect on mental health, the increase in crime that comes with these hotter days. All of a sudden they started nodding their head and say, yep, this is important to us. We can make a difference. Let's proceed and keep looking at the impact of climate change throughout all 34 states where our company is. So that's an example of the sort of thing that we can do. Who wants to go up? Start it. Then we'll just go down the line. All right, Ben.
Okay, thank you, Senator. I think you answered all of it there, the recommendations. I would be thinking, just when you hear the chronic disease argument, we need to remember that it's premature chronic diseases. People are getting these diseases younger. So it's not people getting it older, getting it younger. That's the risk to the workforce. I would really be thinking about anticipatory action. Raj, with your work with Morgan Stanley, you're thinking about futures of markets and wealth management and all these things. We can apply that methodology to this. We're anticipating the risk, getting ahead of it, and then how do we actually adapt? And we can do that, I think, that would really be at a policy level. What adaptation can we do? And with Nashville being, I would argue, a global hub for healthcare, we're really well placed having this type of collaboration to really lead the world in doing that. We've got Ted with his cutting edge research, randomised control study around trees as a drug. I think we can leverage all this with all the expertise we have here in Nashville to really anticipate this risk and mitigate it and adapt to allow Nashville to thrive into the future.
I love it. Kendra.
So I'm gonna take this in a couple of directions. I think there are lots of things we can do as individuals, as organizations, as employers. One thing that we did over the past 2 years, so we published and finalized Nashville's first climate adaptation resilience plan earlier this month. And one of the exercises we did as part of this plan, because we were trying to place such an emphasis on understanding how climate impacts vulnerable populations was what we called an impact chain exercise. And so I think it's a really great first step to understanding how a particular event can actually really affect your organization. And so I'll share with you just an example of what we did in the circumstance of extreme heat. So let's say that the natural climate phenomenon, right, is increased extreme temperature extremes. So then you might have a climate hazard, which could be a shock or stressor, and that's extreme heat trends and events. So what do those experienced impacts look like? Well, it's increased cooling needs, which means more AC. So that could lead to vulnerability outcomes like greater financial insecurity at the individual level, which then can have all of these cascading impacts to your ability to work. Maybe it's your mental health. Maybe it's your ability to actually stay in your home, right? So we went through this exercise to understand all these cascading impacts. And then we specifically looked at interventions and adaptation strategies that could help mitigate at different points along the way. We also help to use that to help unpack root causes and kind of confounding factors, for lack of a better term. And so I would say go through that exercise as an individual or as an organization. And then I'll go back to planting a tree. There are a lot of really sophisticated technological improvements, but I think something that each of us can truly feasibly do that's going to have a variety of benefits, not just for extreme heat, but for public health, for stormwater capture and retention, is planting a tree. And so plant a tree.
Ted.
All righty. So I've got two. I was going to say plant a tree, but thank you for getting that ahead of me.
Plant 8,000 trees.
Plant 8,000 trees. Let's say big ones. So rewilding is like a term people throw around. I mean, if you have a lawn, if you own a lawnmower, or worse, if you have a tractor mower, I want you to seriously think about getting rid of all that stuff. A good friend of mine calls a lawn a drug-dependent carpet. I mean, there's just nothing redeeming about a lawn. I promise you this. So save yourself some work, save your neighborhood, meet some new critters. Try to figure out how to get rid of as much of that as you can. So that's one. Two, and you didn't see this coming. Nobody knew, I promise. But in my spare time, I am the board chair of Louisville's public transit agency. And so let me just tell you, the one thing I need you to do is vote for this public transit thing, because every city in America is watching Nashville, Kentucky. I promise you, every city in America is watching Nashville right now. We are glued to the TV watching Nashville on this. You guys are way ahead of us. We have an upside down transit system. It is not sustainable. The feds aren't going to come and rescue us. So what you do is critically important. So this isn't a local matter, certainly a national matter for sure. So please do that. It will be good for your health. We need people not sitting in their cars by themselves, getting depressed, and then, driving into whatever. Meet a friend, get on a bus, get outside, go for a walk. It's a good thing. Thank you for having me.
Ted, that's probably the most appropriate way to end today.